He was the kind of man who checked his fuel gauges twice, filed his shipping reports on time, and made sure his crew ate a hot meal before a long haul. He ran a small cargo vessel called the Dawnbreak, and for 11 years that ship had carried machine parts, food supplies, and medical equipment to the small human colonies scattered along the outer edges of explored space. It was not a glamorous life, it was an honest one, and Cole preferred it that way. On the morning everything changed, Cole was sitting in the pilot's seat with a cup of cold coffee and a list of routine tasks on his screen. The Dawnbreak was moving through the Varath Belt, a wide stretch of rocky asteroid fields that sat between two mid-sized trade stations. It was a quiet route. Cole had taken it dozens of times. Nothing ever happened in the Varath Belt except the occasional navigation adjustment to avoid a drifting rock. His sensor officer, a young man named Pete Callahan, was half asleep at his station when the alert came through. "Captain," Pete said, sitting up quickly and rubbing his eyes, "I am picking up a life signal. It is faint, but it is there." Cole set down his coffee. "Where?" "Deep in the debris field ahead. There is a destroyed ship out there. The signal is coming from inside what looks like a cracked escape pod." Cole leaned forward and studied the screen. The debris field was thick with broken metal, shattered hull pieces, and floating cargo containers. Whatever ship had been there was completely gone. Only the bones of it remained, spinning slowly in the dark like a scattered puzzle. It was not a recent crash. The metal edges were cold, and the wreckage had already begun to drift apart. "Any idea what kind of ship it was?" Cole asked. Pete shook his head. "No match in the database. The markings on the larger hull pieces are not in any registry I have access to. They look old, Captain. Very old." Cole thought for a moment. The signal was faint. Whatever was alive in that pod was not alive by much. He could file a report, mark the coordinates, and let the Frontier Authority handle it. That would have been the sensible thing to do. That would have been the safe thing to do. He stood up and grabbed his jacket from the back of the chair. "Bring us in slow. I want Nora in the medical bay and ready before we pull anything aboard." Pete looked at him. "You are going in yourself?" "Someone has to," Cole said simply. The Dawnbreak moved carefully through the wreckage. Cole suited up and took a small retrieval shuttle into the debris field alone. The pieces of the destroyed ship floated around him in every direction. The metal was scorched in places, clearly from weapons fire, but the heat was long gone. Whatever battle had taken place here had ended a long time ago. He found the escape pod wedged between two large sections of the broken hull. It was cracked along one side, but still mostly sealed. The life signal on his wrist scanner was coming from inside. It was weak and slow, like a candle that had almost burned all the way down. Cole attached the retrieval line and carefully pulled the pod free from the wreckage. He brought it back to the Dawnbreak and got it into the cargo bay. Pete helped him crack the seal from the outside. The moment the pod opened, a smell like warm ash and something faintly sweet filled the air. And then Cole saw it. Curled up at the bottom of the pod, barely moving, was the smallest creature he had ever seen. It was no bigger than a large house cat. It had scales the color of black glass that caught the light and turned it into a deep, dark violet. Its wings were folded tight against its body, and its long tail was wrapped around itself like it had been holding on through something terrible. Its eyes were closed. Cole stood very still for a moment. "Is that—" Pete started. "I do not know what that is," Cole said quietly. He reached in slowly, carefully, and lifted the creature with both hands. It was light, but he could feel warmth beneath the scales and a very faint heartbeat pressing against his palms. The creature did not move. It did not react. It was breathing, but only just. Cole carried it straight to the medical bay. Nora Ellison was waiting. She was the Dawnbreak's medic, a calm and careful woman who had seen most things in 11 years of frontier medicine. But when Cole walked in holding a tiny black-scaled creature with folded wings, she went completely still for just 1 second before her training took over. "Put it on the table," she said, pulling out her scanner. She worked quickly, checking its temperature, heart rate, and blood oxygen levels. Cole stood close and watched. The creature was cold, dehydrated, and had a small fracture along one of its wing joints, but Nora said it was stable. "It is young," Nora said. "Very young. I would say it has only been alive for a few weeks." "What is it?" Cole asked. "I have no idea," Nora said honestly. "Nothing in my medical database matches this biology. But whatever it is a baby, and it is hurt." Cole pulled a small heating blanket from the cabinet and draped it gently over the creature. As he tucked the edge under its tiny body, the creature stirred slightly. Its tail shifted, and then, very slowly, it reached out and wrapped the very tip of its tail around Cole's wrist. It did not open its eyes. It just held on. Nora looked at Cole. Cole looked at the small creature resting beneath the blanket with its tail curled around him. Somewhere deep in the ship, a hidden beacon inside the cracked escape pod had already sent its signal out into the dark. It had found what it was looking for. It had found the one who saved the child. And now it was telling someone. 3 days had passed since Cole pulled the small creature from the wreckage. And in those 3 days, Ember had changed everything about the Dawnbreak without moving more than a few feet from Cole's side. That was the name Cole had given it. Ember. It felt right. The creature had a warmth to it that reminded him of a fire that had nearly gone out, but was slowly coming back to life. Nora had not objected to the name. Pete had started using it by the second day without even being asked. Ember was recovering faster than Nora expected. The wing fracture was already knitting together. Its appetite had gone from nothing to considerable, and it had discovered a strong preference for the warm grain porridge that Pete made every morning. It would sit at the edge of the galley table and watch the pot with those glowing violet eyes until someone filled a small bowl and set it in front of it. Then it would eat with focused and serious attention, as if the meal were very important business. It was also watching everything. Not in the way an animal watches things, with simple curiosity or hunger. Ember watched the crew the way a student watches a teacher. It observed. It learned. By the 3rd day, it had already begun mimicking small words it heard repeated often. It could not speak them clearly, but the shape of the sounds was there, rough and low in its throat, like someone learning a new instrument for the first time. Cole found it fascinating and a little unsettling at the same time. The Dawnbreak docked at Frontier Station Kilo 7 late on the 3rd day. It was a mid-sized station, loud and crowded, sitting at the junction of 4 major trade routes. Cole needed to file a report about the destroyed ship and the debris field in the Varath Belt, and Nora wanted access to better medical equipment to finish monitoring Ember's recovery. They had barely been docked for 2 hours when the trouble started. The first sign was Lieutenant Diane Marsh. She arrived at the Dawnbreak's docking bay with 2 officers behind her and a look on her face that said she already knew more than she was letting on. She was from the Galactic Frontier Authority, the organization responsible for law and order in the outer regions. She was sharp-eyed and efficient, and she moved like someone who did not waste steps. "Captain Harper," she said, stepping aboard without waiting for an invitation, "I understand you retrieved a living creature from a wreck site in the Varath Belt 3 days ago. I need to see it." Cole stood in the corridor and did not move aside. "You need to see it or you want to take it?" Diane met his eyes. "That depends on what it is." "It is a recovering animal that I pulled from a wrecked escape pod," Cole said. "It was injured and nearly dead. My medic has been treating it." "Captain, there are signals being picked up across 3 sectors that we cannot explain. They started approximately 72 hours ago, right around the time your ship entered the Varath Belt. We have reason to believe your retrieval is connected." Cole said nothing. He stepped aside. Ember was in the medical bay, curled on the padded examination table with the heating blanket still draped over it. When Diane walked in, Ember lifted its head and looked at her with calm, unblinking, violet eyes. Diane stopped walking. For just a moment, something crossed her face that was not authority or efficiency. It was something older, something close to recognition, though she could not have said why. "What is that?" she said quietly. "Ember," Cole said from the doorway. "That is what I told you." Before Diane could respond, the station's internal communication system crackled, and a voice asked for Captain Cole Harper to come to docking bay reception immediately. There was a visitor requesting him by name. The voice said the visitor had been waiting for over an hour and would not leave. Cole looked at Nora. Nora looked at Ember. Ember put its head back down and closed its eyes. Cole went to the docking bay reception alone. The being waiting for him was unlike anything Cole had seen up close before. It stood nearly 2.5 meters tall, with 4 long arms and a narrow body covered in pale blue-gray skin that seemed to shift slightly in the light. Its face was long and still, with large, dark eyes that held no white at all. It was dressed in layered robes of deep green and silver, and it held itself with the kind of quiet stillness that comes from a very long life. It introduced itself as Ambassador Orvex, representing a diplomatic collective Cole had never heard of. It spoke in clean and careful standard Galactic, which Cole's translator handled without difficulty. "Captain Harper," Orvex said, "please sit down. What I need to tell you is not short." They sat in a small corner of the reception area away from the noise of the station. Orvex folded 2 of its arms across its chest and leaned slightly forward. "The creature you saved," it said, "is called a Vornkai. They are not animals, Captain. They are the oldest recorded living species in this galaxy. They were here before most civilizations learned to build fires. Each one carries biological memory, encoded in their cells from birth, going back thousands of generations. They are living records of everything that has ever happened to their kind." Cole listened without speaking. "They are also bonded creatures," Orvex continued. "When a Vornkai is saved from death by another living being, a bond forms. It is not a choice. It is simply what they are. The Vornkai will know that being above all others for the rest of its life. It will grow around that bond. It will become something extraordinary because of it." Cole thought about the small tail wrapped around his wrist in the dark of the medical bay. "The Vornkai were believed to be completely extinct," Orvex said. "They were destroyed 300 years ago in a campaign carried out by an empire known as the Black Emperors. Every last one was hunted. Every nest was found. Every egg was crushed." Orvex paused. "Or so it was believed." Cole felt the quiet of the station around him despite all its noise. "The beacon in the escape pod," Orvex said. "It sent a signal the moment you picked up the child. It sent it in all directions, Captain, including directions we do not want it to have reached." "The Black Emperors," Cole said. Orvex looked at him steadily. "They are already moving." The word spread through Frontier Station Kilo 7 the way fire spreads through dry grass. It started with a single alert from the long-range sensor array at the edge of the sector, then a second alert, then a third. Within 30 minutes of Cole's conversation with Ambassador Orvex, the station's main operations center was fully lit, and every screen on every wall was showing the same thing. A fleet was coming. Not a patrol group, not a border unit, a fleet. 9,753 warships moving in tight formation through the dark space beyond the outer boundary markers. The ships were black, every single one of them, and they moved without running lights, which meant they were not trying to be polite about their arrival. They were simply coming, and they wanted everyone to know it. The station commander, a broad-shouldered woman named Carol Vance, had served on frontier stations for 20 years and had never once called a full emergency alert. She called one now. The sound of it filled every corridor of Kilo 7. Aliens of a dozen different species began moving quickly through the main passages, pulling children close, heading toward the inner sections of the station. Shop fronts shut down. The docking bays filled with ships trying to leave before whatever was coming arrived. Cole stood in the operations center beside Ambassador Orvex and watched the screen. The number sat there in cold white text. 9,753. He read it 3 times, as if reading it again might change it. It did not change. "How long?" Cole said. Carol Vance looked at her senior analyst, a quiet man named Greg Ford, who had been doing rapid calculations since the alerts began. Greg looked up from his screen and said, At current speed, approximately 19 hours before the lead ships reach this position. 19 hours. Orvex stood beside Cole and spoke in a low voice. This is not a patrol sent to investigate. This is the full mobilization of the Black Emperor war fleet. They have not moved like this in over 100 years. The last time they deployed this many ships, they erased an entire civilization from the galactic record. Cole turned to look at him. An entire civilization? Yes, Orvex said simply. The Black Emperors do not send warnings. They send numbers. Cole left the operations center and walked back to the dawn break. He needed to think, and he could not think in a room full of noise and panic. He went straight to the medical bay. Ember was awake. It was sitting up on the examination table, no longer curled under the blanket. It looked larger than it had that morning. Nora had mentioned earlier in the day that Ember's growth rate was accelerating in a way that did not match any biology she understood. The creature that had been the size of a house cat 3 days ago was now closer to the size of a medium dog. Its scales had deepened from black glass to something richer, like dark stone with violet light moving beneath the surface when it breathed. It looked at Cole when he walked in. Not the way an animal looks at a person who feeds it. It looked at him the way someone looks at a person they have been waiting for. Cole sat down on the stool beside the table and said nothing for a moment. Ember watched him with those steady violet eyes. Nora was at her desk in the corner, quietly reviewing her medical notes, but she was listening. 9,753 ships, Cole said aloud, not to anyone in particular. Ember made a low sound in its chest. Not a growl, not a purr, something in between like a question. They are coming for you, Cole said. Ember did not look away. Cole thought about what Orvex had told him. He thought about the Vornkai being hunted 3 centuries ago. He thought about the eggs that were crushed, and the nests that were destroyed, and the entire species being removed from the galaxy because someone decided they were too dangerous to exist. He thought about finding this small creature barely breathing in a broken pod in the middle of a debris field, alone and cold and holding on with everything it had. He thought about his daughter Lily, who was 12 years old and lived with her grandmother back on Earth, and who had once told him very seriously that the reason dragons existed in every culture's old stories was because people always knew, deep down, that something magnificent had been here before them. He had laughed at the time. He was not laughing now. Nora set down her notes and looked at him. "What are you going to do?" "I do not know yet," Cole said. "The Galactic Council is already in emergency session," Nora said. "I heard it on the station feed. Most of the member delegates want to hand Ember over. They think it is the only way to stop the fleet from engaging." Cole looked at Ember. Ember looked at Cole. "Surrendering Ember means finishing what the Black Emperors started 300 years ago," Cole said. "The last Vornkai, the last one, and we hand it over to the people who destroyed every single one of the others." Nora said nothing because there was nothing to say to that. Cole reached out and rested his hand on Ember's side. The warmth beneath the scales was strong and steady now, nothing like the faint flicker he had felt in the cargo bay 3 days ago. Ember leaned into his hand slightly, and the violet light beneath its scales moved like something breathing under dark water. "I am going to send a message to the Galactic Council," Cole said. "I am going to ask them for time." "Time for what?" Nora asked. "Time to find a better answer than surrender," Cole said. He stood and walked to the ship's communication panel. He drafted the message himself, in plain language, without formal titles or diplomatic framing. He said that he was the one who had found the Vornkai. He said that he was the one it had bonded to. And he said that he believed there was a way through this that did not end with the last living Vornkai being handed to the empire that murdered its entire species. He asked for 6 hours. The council took 40 minutes to respond. They gave him until morning. Cole went back to sit with Ember. He did not sleep. He sat on the stool beside the table and thought, and Ember sat with him in the quiet, its tail resting against his knee, its violet eyes soft and open in the dark. Outside the station, 19 hours away, 9,753 black ships continued to move through the dark without lights, without haste, and without any doubt at all about where they were going. Morning came to Frontier Station Kilo 7 the way morning comes to all space stations, not with sunlight, but with a shift in the hum of the systems and a change in the lighting strips along the corridors from dim amber to steady white. Cole had not slept. He had spent the hours between the Council's response and the first light cycle sitting with Ember, thinking through every angle he could find. Nora had brought him coffee twice and said nothing either time, which was her way of telling him she was with him without making it into a conversation. Pete had checked in once from the cockpit, reporting that the Black Emperor fleet had not slowed and had not changed course. It was still coming. The numbers were still the same. 9,753. At the 4th hour of the morning cycle, two things happened almost at the same time. The first was the arrival of Elder Una Whitfield. She was a small woman, somewhere past 70, with short white hair and a way of walking that suggested she had once moved very fast and had simply decided at some point that the world could wait for her. She was a xenolinguist, one of the best the human academic community had produced in a generation, and the Galactic Council had pulled her from a research station 2 sectors away and put her on the fastest available transport the moment the situation became clear. She came aboard the Dawnbreak with a single bag over one shoulder and a thin data tablet under her arm, looked at Ember for a long moment without speaking, and then said to Cole, "I have spent 40 years studying dead languages. I did not expect to need them today." Cole liked her immediately. The second thing that happened was the communication request from the Black Emperor fleet. It came through on all frequencies at once, which was itself a statement. It was not a private channel request. It was a broadcast, heard by every ship and station within range. The voice that came with it was deep and flat and utterly without warmth, speaking in standard galactic with the kind of precision that suggested the speaker had learned the language purely as a tool and felt nothing for it. "This is Supreme Commander Varric Solus of the Black Emperor Sovereign Fleet. We are addressing Frontier Station Kilo 7 and all vessels in the surrounding sectors. You are harboring a Vornkai. You will surrender it within 6 hours. If you do not comply, this station and every vessel within 3 systems will be destroyed. There will be no further communication until the deadline." And then the channel closed. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Cole had heard in years. Carol Vance called an emergency meeting in the operations center within 10 minutes. Every senior figure on the station was there, along with Ambassador Orvex and 3 other alien diplomats who had not yet evacuated. The room was tense in the way that rooms get when everyone is afraid but nobody wants to say it first. The arguments came quickly. One of the diplomats, a short and sharp-voiced being named Consul Tev, said that the math was simple. 1 creature against 1 station and 3 systems. There was no calculation that ended with keeping Ember. The Galactic Council had to make the difficult choice. Carol Vance said nothing, but her expression said she was not far from agreeing. Ambassador Orvex argued carefully and precisely that surrendering the last Vornkai would set a precedent that no living species in the galaxy could afford. If the Black Emperors could erase a species and then collect the last survivor centuries later without consequence, then no small civilization was ever truly safe. The room divided roughly in half. Cole stood at the back and listened until he could not listen anymore. Then he stepped forward. "Let me talk to Varric Solus," he said. The room went quiet. Consul Tev turned to look at him with an expression that was not quite contempt, but was close to it. "You are a cargo captain." "Yes," Cole said, "and I am the one Ember bonded to, which means I am the only person in this room that Varric Solus actually needs to hear from." Carol Vance looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at Orvex. Orvex gave a very slight nod. "You have 10 minutes, Carol said. They set up the communication link in a side room off the operations center. Elder Yuna sat beside Cole with her tablet, ready to assist with any language that standard translation might miss. Ember had followed Cole from the dawnbreak and now sat on the floor beside his chair, still and calm, its eyes open and watching the blank screen. The screen filled with the image of Varek Solus. He was not what Cole had expected. He had expected something overtly fearsome. What he saw instead was an old being, ancient even, tall and angular, with deep-set eyes the color of old iron and a face that had long since stopped showing anything easily. He wore no decorations on his uniform. He did not need them. The weight of 9,753 ships sat behind him in the darkness of space and decorated him more than anything else could. Varek looked at Cole. Then his eyes moved to Ember. Something shifted in his expression for just a fraction of a second, something Cole could not name, and then it was gone. "You are the human who took the Vornkai," Varek said. "I am the human who saved the Vornkai," Cole said. The distinction landed in the room like a stone dropped in still water. Varek's expression did not change. "Surrender it. This does not need to become larger than it already is." Cole leaned forward slightly. He did not raise his voice. He did not list threats or quote treaties or talk about what the Galactic Council would or would not do. He simply looked at the ancient commander on the screen and asked the one question that had come to him in the dark of the medical bay the night before. "If you finish what you started 300 years ago," Cole said, "what exactly do you win?" Varek said nothing. The silence stretched. Elder Yuna sat very still beside Cole. Ember did not move. "You already destroyed every other one," Cole continued, keeping his voice quiet and level. "Every nest, every egg, every last adult. 300 years ago you decided the Vornkai had to disappear, and you made it happen. And here you are, 100 years of silence later, mobilizing your entire war fleet for one small creature that a cargo captain found in a broken pod." Cole paused. "What is it that you are actually afraid of, Commander?" Varek's jaw tightened slightly. And then Ember stood up. It moved slowly and deliberately, stepping forward until it was fully visible in the frame of the communication screen. It had grown again overnight. It now stood level with the top of Cole's seated shoulder. Its wings were folded, but their edges caught the light. Its scales moved with that deep violet light shifting beneath them like something alive under the surface. It looked directly at Varek Solus through the screen. And Varek Solus, Supreme Commander of 9,753 warships, looked back at it. For a long moment, nobody in either location made a sound. Then Varek said one word, quietly, almost to himself, in his own language, not in standard galactic. Elder Yuna heard it. She looked down at her tablet. Her hands were very still. Cole looked at her. "What did he say?" Yuna looked up slowly. Her voice, when she spoke, was just above a whisper. "It means impossible," she said. The word hung in the air of that small room like smoke. Impossible. Varek Solus had not moved. His image on the screen was completely still, his ancient iron-colored eyes fixed on Ember with an expression that Cole could not fully read. It was not anger. It was not calculation. It was something rawer than either of those things. Something that had been buried under centuries of iron and command, and had just been disturbed by the sight of a living creature that should not exist. Ember did not look away from the screen. Cole watched the commander's face and said nothing. He had learned, in 11 years of negotiating supply contracts and navigating difficult docking authorities and talking his way out of border disputes, that silence, after the right question, is more powerful than any follow-up. So he waited. Elder Yuna sat beside him with her tablet open, her eyes moving between Ember and the screen. It was Ember that broke the silence, and it did not break it with a sound. It broke it with light. The violet glow beneath its scales, which had always moved slowly like deep water, suddenly brightened. Not blindingly, not violently, but steadily, the way dawn comes. And with the light came images. They appeared in the air around Ember like photographs hung in open space, not projected from any device, not generated by any system on the Dawnbreak or the station. They came from Ember itself, rising out of the light beneath its scales and expanding outward into the room, filling the space around Cole and Una and the screen with moving pictures that were absolutely silent and absolutely clear. The first images showed the Vornkai as they had been. Dozens of them, hundreds, moving through open space alongside ships of a dozen different species, their scales catching starlight, their wings spread wide. They were not weapons. They were not soldiers. They moved beside other beings the way a river moves beside a road, present, parallel, natural. In the images, small Vornkai curled beside alien children in what looked like learning halls. Adult Vornkai flew alongside exploration vessels at the edge of uncharted systems. Old Vornkai sat in open courts where disputes were being settled, their presence seeming to bring a stillness that made the proceedings calmer. They were companions, witnesses, living memory given form and warmth. Cole watched in complete silence. The images shifted. Now they showed the Black Emperors, but not as Cole knew them from the records Orvex had described. These were older images, from before the war, from before the hunting. And the Black Emperors in these images were different. They moved with purpose, but not cruelty. Their ships were large, but their ports were open. And beside their commanders, in the oldest images of all, there was a Vornkai, a single one, larger than any of the others, with scales the deep red color of cooling fire, the Ashkind. Cole did not know the name yet, but he would learn it from Una within the hour. The images showed the Ashkind beside the Black Emperor people across generations. Bonded not to one individual, but somehow, in a way that biology alone could not explain, to the civilization itself. Present at their great moments, present at their losses, a living thread running through the fabric of who they were. And then the images showed the day the Ashkind died. It was not a battle. It was an accident. A catastrophic system failure on a flagship vessel during a deep space crossing. The Ashkind had been aboard. It did not survive. The images were fragmented here, as if even the memory of it was too painful to hold in full, but the outline was clear enough. The Black Emperors had lost their Vornkai, and then slowly across generations, they had become what they were now. The images faded. The room was very quiet. On the screen, Varric Solus had not moved, but his face had changed. The iron was still there, but something beneath it had cracked open slightly, the way old stone cracks when something long frozen inside it finally begins to thaw. Cole looked at the screen. His voice, when he spoke, was gentle. "You did not destroy the Vornkai because you were afraid of them," Cole said. "You destroyed them because you lost yours, and you could not bear to see what you no longer had." Varric said nothing. 300 years of grief, Cole said, and it made you into something the Ashkind would not have recognized. The silence that followed was the longest of Cole's life. Then Varric Solus closed his eyes. Just for a moment. Just long enough for something old and heavy to move through him. When he opened them again, he looked not at Cole, but at Ember. Ember looked back at him with calm, violet eyes. Varric spoke in standard Galactic this time, slowly, as if choosing each word with great care. "We did not believe another one could exist. Neither did anyone else," Cole said. "But here it is." Another long pause. Then Varric said, "The fleet will hold position." In the operations center, Carol Vance heard those words come through on the broadcast channel and sat down heavily in her chair. Consul Tev stopped talking mid-sentence. Ambassador Orvex stood very still with his eyes closed for a moment, and what crossed his face was something close to relief. The Black Emperor fleet, all 9,753 ships, stopped moving. Not a retreat, not a defeat, a stillness. The kind that comes when something that has been in motion for a very long time finally finds a reason to pause. The full diplomatic process would take weeks. There would be council sessions and formal negotiations, and a great deal of careful work done by people far more trained in those things than Cole Harper. Elder Una would spend the next month working with Varek's own historians to properly document the memories Ember had shared. Ambassador Orvex would oversee the opening of the first formal communication channel between the Black Emperor sovereign territories and the Galactic Council in over 2 centuries. None of that happened in that room on that morning. What happened in that room was simpler than all of it. Cole reached out and rested his hand on Ember's back. Ember leaned into him the way it always did, that warm, steady weight pressing back against his palm. The violet light beneath its scales moved slowly, peacefully, like a fire that had found enough air to breathe. That evening, after the meetings and the messages and the long, careful conversations had settled into something manageable, Cole took Ember out through the station's observation bay, a wide, pressurized platform that extended into open space with nothing between the visitor and the stars but a clear barrier. They stood there together in the quiet, the man and the dragon, looking out at the stars. Somewhere in the dark beyond the outer markers, 9,753 black ships sat still and silent, waiting for something other than war to tell them what to do next. Cole pulled out his personal communicator and typed a short message to his daughter Lily, back on Earth, who was 12 years old and had always believed in dragons. It said, "You would have loved today." He sent it and put the communicator away and stood with Ember in the open starlight for a long time. The galaxy had empires and fleets and ancient powers that had been shaping history since before humans learned to write it down. It had weapons and treaties and 1,000 years of conflict recorded in databases that no single being could ever read in one lifetime. And it turned out that what moved the oldest empire in the known galaxy was not a threat, not a weapon, and not a carefully prepared diplomatic argument. It was a small creature, barely weeks old, that a cargo captain had decided was worth stopping for. It was the choice to reach into a broken pod in a cold debris field and carry something fragile back to the light. It was the simplest thing in the world, and it was enough.